And welcome to this revision video for 7.1 energy choices and security. And today we're looking at choosing energy resources and the environmental impact of. So you need to be aware that energy security is the ability to secure affordable, reliable, sufficient energy supplies for the needs of a particular country. And obviously those different things all are into account. So it needs to be affordable for people using it, reliable and sufficient in that you have enough. So you know, obviously at the minute there is an energy crisis in Europe, and that is because we are unsure at times whether we're going to have enough gas, for example, to last summer, to last the winter, and that means that it's increasing the cost, it makes it less reliable, and we don't necessarily have sufficient supplies. So effectively, you need to be aware that 61% of the UK's fuel supplies comes from overseas. That obviously means that we're reliant on other countries in the UK. And as a result, the energy security has dropped, and you know that the price of energy has increased significantly over the past few months. And this all links directly to this understanding of energy security. So you can see here that the UK gas supplies come from Europe, 47% of it, and therefore it's having an impact on our costs because that comes obviously largely from Russia. And therefore the price, as we said, has increased of electricity because a lot of electrical generation comes from gas production. And you can see here the dependence of the UK on different countries. So we have a lot of coal being used and brought in. We have a lot of gas being brought in, and therefore the net energy import cost in 10 years ago in the UK was £24,070 million. So a huge amount is in. The UK also has much less gas security because we can't store as much gas as other European countries. So in terms of our actual storage, you can see here we have very, very small amounts compared to other countries in Europe. And nuclear power, the capacity of nuclear power over the next 15 years is going to drop, even with the addition of Hinkley Point C, which is a massive nuclear power station being built in Devon. So energy security then is a big issue at the moment, and therefore it's one that you'll probably be able to answer relatively straightforward. But why do we have these energy security issues at the minute? Well, relationships with other countries are changing, particularly the UK and the EU, and obviously the Russia issues. There is an increase in prices directly linking to the Russian Ukraine conflict, and also due to the fact that industry slowed down during COVID and now there's more demand. So as I said, there's increased global demand since COVID, although due to the global recession, this may be starting to peter away. War is causing obviously big issues. There is lack of storage in the UK, and there is a slow pace of historical developments. So the UK government are now really pushing this, but it has taken a long time for that to happen. Nuclear power stations are being decommissioned, and therefore there is less energy over time being used. Being generated by the nuclear power stations. So energy choices have been made depending on the supply available. So what type of energies countries tend to use is often due to the availability of supply, whether that's internal supplies or imported. Obviously, much more now internal supplies are being favoured, but that's not possible for the UK. Technological developments such as fracking and wave energy. politics. Okay, so the problem, which is what's happened in the UK, is the government have pushed in the past for low cost imports rather than developing internal supplies, and that has now caused the energy security issues. Economics will obviously drive energy, so they'll try and get the cheapest energy forms. Cultural attitude, so there is obviously a shift now from in culture wanting to go more towards green energy. Sustainability as a result, which one is more sustainable into the future, is more and more being developed based on that. And environmental considerations such as the COP27 summit, which has made people aware that we still need to remove fossil fuels, but they are being held on quite strong. So what's happened then in terms of global energy consumption? Well, you can see here the global energy consumption has increased over the last sort of 50 years. However, there are changes developing. You could see oil usage has increased, but it is now starting to level off. Okay, you can see global gas has been increasing. You can see coal has increased, but what's also increased is these renewables, which are increasing more and more. And you can see that the shares in primary energy production, gas has increased over time, coal and oil has tended to drop over, and the renewables now are starting to head up, which is much, much needed. And if we look at electricity generation, you can see the difference between 2004, where the majority of electrical generation was due to coal, whereas that is still going to be the case in 2030, but we have increased reliance on renewables as well. And you can see here energy consumption by different region. You can see in which parts of the world are using most energy, and that was the parts of the world that you can see here, but more importantly, Asia is increasing as the population grows. So why haven't we just moved away from fossil fuels? Because you'd think that this would be an obvious thing to do. Well, there is an increasing need, obviously, for renewables. We know that there's an issue in reliability. We know that there's a price increase, but we also know that there's an environmental impact. So why have it been so slow, and why, particularly for the UK, have we been so slow? One of the big things is our transport industry is built on fossil fuels. So a lot of our energy consumption is about cars, lorries, trains, and this would require a huge shift in investment. It's been cheaper to produce electricity with fossil fuels and greener methods, so therefore the investment hasn't been there till recently. And contracts have also locked countries into agreements. So some countries may want to move, but they are financially obliged to stick with a fossil fuel company for 20 years. There might also be geographical restrictions in some locations. So, for example, Iceland can really use geothermal power, but the UK has limited geothermal prospects. Hydrogen is a potential thing that has been looked at into the future. Hydrogen is a high energy gas that can be produced in a green way using solar panels. It can be used therefore in vehicles. It can replace methane in central heating and cooking, and it doesn't release any emissions of CO2. But there have been concerns due to safety and transport and storage issues, although again this looks like hopefully it will overcome in the future. And then there is something called nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion is where you fuse atoms together by firing them together at high speeds, and then they create lots of energy. This is how the sun works. And therefore, if we could get this to work, you could actually use water, which you can just get heavy water from the sea, and it creates a product of helium, so completely safe. It provides no dangerous waste. It would be almost an unlimited energy supply, and it would produce no carbon dioxide. This has not yet been achieved. It's getting closer, but investment has been slow, but it's starting to increase pace now. So we also need to obviously consider the issue of carbon emissions. So you know that carbon emissions have increased, and this is anthropocentric carbon emissions. Earth is very sensitive to carbon dioxide changes. So whilst there is only about 0.04% carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it is directly being linked. An increase is causing global warming. And you can see here that the rate of carbon emissions increase has dramatically increased over the last 50 sort of years. And you can see the sources of these carbon dioxide emissions. So the main sources in terms of industry are coal, oil, gas, but also cement releases carbon dioxide when it dries. So building releases carbon dioxide. So where are they coming from? Where are the carbon dioxide emissions coming from? Well, current emissions are coming mainly from sort of China, the US, but this doesn't always mean that we should just blame those countries, because in the past other countries have been the highest emitters. And basically what we have also seen is in terms of carbon dioxide emission per capita, so that's how much how much in terms of earnings people have. The highest emitter at the minute is Qatar, whereas US is a lot lower down per capita. So you need to understand then what is happening, okay, and we need to know why it's happening. So you can see certain countries, the emissions are dropping. So the USA, for example, emissions have been dropping really since sort of 2006, 2007, whereas the opposite is happening in China. But China is dedicated to reduce their emissions in the future, and you can see the trend is hopefully hitting a peak. The belief is that the world's peak emissions will happen in 2026, and then it will start to. Now, what we can also see here is the amount per capita over time, and again you can see US dropping, you can see the United Kingdom dropping, but you can see that China had increased, although it is starting to level off. So the UK has reduced its carbon dioxide emissions through decreasing the number of coal power stations, growth in renewable energy, declining manufacturing, more fuel efficient engines, and a greater population density reduces the capita emissions. So as the UK's population has gone up, it reduces the amount per person. Now it's important to identify that a decline in manufacturing pushes the carbon dioxide emissions somewhere else. So the fact that we import a lot of goods from China means really our carbon dioxide emissions have been framed as China's. Now, energy emissions are therefore important to consider moving forward, and one example of this is in Canada. So Canada has a very high emission rate of carbon dioxide, and one of the reasons is using tar sands or oil sands, which are naturally occurring levels of soil with high oil content. And they naturally have boreal forests on them, and particular ecosystems called muskeg ecosystems. And you can see here in Canada, in Alberta, Canada, there is large amounts of these oil sands which are now being exploited. So the muskeg is a type of peat bog of acidic conditions, meaning that the vegetation is only semi-decomposed, and normally they're 30 meters deep and thousands of years old, making them very unique. So land restoration does occur by mining organisations, but they can't really restore the original landscapes. So these landscapes, so the first impact of these oil sands being used for oil is the landscapes are being destroyed. The peat bog, which is a big carbon sink, is being dried out necessarily. That releases the carbon dioxide, and the ecosystem is lost even if they try to restore it later. So there's an example of what the landscape would look like beforehand. So what happens is they use this oil, but it is very inefficient. So 1 barrel of gas has to be used to produce 2 oil barrels. So therefore you can see the amount of energy being put in is significant to get the energy out. This wouldn't have been economically a bit sustainable unless the oil prices had gone up as they have. Tailing ponds then are where every barrel of oil is produced. There is a lot of wastewater produced, and you can see these images of these tailing ponds here, highly polluted water, and it is water with oil in it that is left as a waste product. Also, we can look at biofuels, and biofuels include ethanol, which has been produced for decades from sugarcane in Brazil, and EU regulations are increasing the amount of biofuel in petrol and diesel. So biofuel basically means a fuel made from living materials, and normally plant waste that's been fermented. Now, biofuel is being used more and more. As we said, it's now in our petrol. I think there's sort of 7% diesel in there. It has been an increase. It does decrease the emissions of carbon dioxide because it's carbon neutral, because the plants that grow absorb carbon dioxide, and then when they're burnt, they release the same amount of carbon. And biofuel consumption is increasing around the world, but there is one big drawback, and that is that it uses a lot of land. So if you're planting it in farmland, food prices may increase, and if you plant it in natural biodiversity areas, the biodiversity will drop. So biofuels, as I said, are made from crops, and if you look at the worldwide production and use of land, 95% of cropland is used for food, only 5% is used for biofuel. And as a result, you could see here that when biofuel has been used, the food prices have increased. So you see here as a result. So biofuels, some people think are actually a threat to climate change because people have chopped down rainforests to grow biofuels, and that is obviously going to have a negative impact. Because we lose a lot of the high absorbing trees, and the soil will called the decomposition of the chopped down or burnt down trees will release a huge amount of carbon dioxide, and obviously the food prices could increase as a result.